Well, Kurt Andersen is the co-creator, co-producer, and co-writer of the new series commandz, which is available to purchase now at commandczseries.com, and the writer of evilgeniuses, which helped inspire the series. Kurt Andersen, welcome back to the Climate Pod.
Couldn't be happier. Thanks for having me.
Well, we're so excited to have you on. Evilgeniuses is a book that Ty and I not only love and talk about on the show, talk about often on the show, but it's one of the things just in our own conversations that I think we reference more than as much as any book we've ever read. I'm curious, how does Steven Soderbergh first approach you about potentially creating a series as with evilgeniuses as the jumping off point?
Well, because I had known Steven a little bit for, I don't know, a dozen years, but very slightly. And we communicated, and he read my books and I saw his movies, and we talked occasionally. But, anyway, right after evilgeniuses came out of the blue, he wrote me this extremely effusive, enthusiastic email saying, and in his experimental way, he didn't know exactly what he wanted to do. He didn't say, oh, let's, make a movie with, and so this actor will play Milton Friedman. He didn't have any idea like that. But he said, I want to do something, and I don't know what it is. And let's just start talking. And it was, it was high COVID time, pre-vaccine COVID time. So we started having a lot of calls, Zoom calls, and one thing led to another, and we talked and developed basically a brief and a plan for, how do we, he was very interested in, like, how do we reach young people who maybe aren't even that interested or engaged in politics, don't think of themselves as being political or active in the climate movement or the, various, maybe we were still calling things Occupy movements back then. I don't know. But any of the kind of progressive political movements. But how do we get to them, and how do we do it entertainingly, right? He said, I am not the person probably to just do a homework-y thing. How do we? So anyway, one thing led to another, and we workshop various ideas of doing very short, TikTok length pieces that might embody some of the messages of evilgeniuses. And we finally came to saying, no, let's do stories that he knows how to make and I know how to tell, having written novels as well as histories, and to make it entertaining. So, we decided to do this science fiction time travel comedy in which some of the messages of evilgeniuses, as you know, you've read the book, about it's a long game, nothing happens overnight. Of course, in this show, things do happen overnight because it's a fantasy. But that how does change happen? And is it all about radical change, or is it about incremental change, or is it both? Or anyway, so these complicated ideas that grow out of this, whatever it is, 400-page book and 400-page history, we thought, how can we distill those into delicious bite-sized nuggets? And that's how we got there.
Did you ever think of evilgeniuses or any of the nonfiction? Like, I think about that, like Fantasyland too. Like those could be like great jumping off points, right, for TV series or films. But when you were writing evilgeniuses, did you ever think about it about it potentially being a TV series or film?
I didn't, and other people have talked. Some people talked to me about making a documentary about it. Some very great and famous people. And that didn't happen. And then somebody else talked to me about it, which I really never thought of, which was, I joke about an actor playing Milton Friedman, but about making it a scripted series of some kind, which would be interesting to do. But certainly as I was writing it, no, I mean, when I'm writing novels, you can't help at a certain point almost like, oh, this could be, who could Meryl Streep play here? Who would Ryan Gosling be in this one? But with with these nonfiction books, I never had that thought. I mean, you have, or I had, oh, somebody could do a documentary because I'm a boring person. That's what I think. And in fact, Steven, when he first wrote me, had a notion of a kind of different kind of documentary that might be doable. I don't know if you know this. There's a British documentarian, amazing guy named Adam Curtis. And he said, I could see it to some Adam Curtis-y thing. And then he moved away from that, thinking, I think it would be, not accessible and not entertaining to, any old person. Anyway, but now the idea of Steven Soderbergh doing an Adam Curtis-like documentary based on my work I'm obsessed with. Of course, I want that to happen now. But anyway, but no, I didn't really. I mean, especially, when I'm writing any book, I'm so deep into it and trying to make it right and correct in its own way. And being deep in the middle of one right now, I'm speaking, in like, 20 months pregnant with this book. And, so I'm certainly not thinking about, how can this be a TV show?
Well, what did you hope to do with a fictional series that you couldn't with a nonfiction book?
Well, I mean, really, as I say, to get to people who aren't the type of people who write, who watch, 3-hour serious documentaries about inequality and unfairness and the history of how the climate disaster was, happened and enabled to a great degree, extended by the right and John Sununu in particular. Just thinking, there are other ways to skin this cat than the obvious. And Steven, one I had known about and one was aware of, that he has a real experimental streak, and not just formally experimental, like, I'll do a weird thing, but like, what can we do that's new and not only make up a story, but make up a way of telling a story. And so just his sheer, self-funded I can do whatever I want. I don't have a studio or a channel or a platform telling me what I can make or we should make. Just let's do it. And that, extended all the way from the beginning to, let's do this as an entertaining piece of fiction, hopefully entertaining piece of fiction. To like, do they need to be half hours? No, they can be 20 minutes, they can be 8 minutes, they can be 13 minutes. So his make it up as you go along spirit informed the whole project.
What's been kind of go ahead, Ty.
Well, what themes from Evil Geniuses did you and Steven want to focus on?
Well, I would say, one of the things, and I don't really talk about it, I don't think talk about it till the end, which is, or maybe I do at the beginning as well. But anyway, that the right, the Evil Geniuses played this brilliant long game, right? That here they were in 1970, 71, first inspired by, motivated by what they took to be this left-wing crisis that was going to bring socialism to America, and started doing what they were doing. But then, as soon as that fear faded, just said, no, let's do this. Let's have this mission and keep our eyes on, several balls and stick with it and build our counter-establishment and build the think tanks and start the Federalist Society and all the rest that they did. They really had a long game. So the idea of it being a long game and not, as in our fantasy, being, let's just time travel and make it happen in 10 days, was one of the messages. But then about the in its broad and sometimes cartoonish, in the best way, I think this show says, gives you a sense of, for instance, our fossil fuels mogul, like, he's going to escape the horrific effects of global warming by living in a bunker, and all of the things about what private equity does, and also there's in Evil Geniuses, I don't know if you remember, I talk about what I believe to be the importance of non-binary thinking in an ideological sense, that and to me, an example of that was the episode we do where we posit that nuclear energy might be a big part, in fact, of solving the climate crisis. So it's comedy and it's fantasy, but these real issues and I think pretty thoughtfully are dealt with by and showing the bad guys and the semi-bad guys and the good guys. And and again, even the billionaire, the digitized AI billionaire, deceased billionaire who still runs his company, is played by Michael Cera. Is he good? Is he bad? Was he bad and then he becomes good? It's complicated because this is a broad comedy, but in real life, people are complicated. So that's I guess and as you may have noticed, having watched the show, I mean, the phrase evil geniuses is used more than once. At one point, one of my writers, friends and co-writers saying, well, let's just call the thing evil geniuses. Let's just call the thing. I said, that would maybe be, that would confuse people who, at least the people who've read the book, of thinking it's something it isn't. But anyway, it was something we were aware of throughout. And just, again, since it's meant to be an entertaining spur to take action and think about the long game of effective action. That's that's what we were trying to do, and say, here's the problem, some of which you know about, and maybe you've actually learned a little bit about something. Maybe people hear private equity, but like in the description of what the Liev Schreiber character does, I mean, it's a satirical description of what private equity does, but not inaccurate. So maybe people learn things along the way, even though it doesn't really seem like homework.
No, it works as such a great compliment to the book because, one of the lessons of the book Evil Geniuses was like, it worked. Like these evil geniuses took on these plans and they executed on the plans and it worked. And like you take the inverse of that, commandz, and I don't want to spoil things of the show for people who have not seen it, but you have characters who are taking actions, as weird and kind of twisted as they are, but they work, right? They convince these evil people to do better, and it works. And with climate, there's been so much tragedy. There's been so much tragedy of late. Like we're recording this days after we've seen the fires unfold and Maui, and that can create climate doomers who espouse that there's nothing that can be done to adapt or mitigate to the worst impacts of the climate crisis, which we know is not true, right? And even with our democracy crisis, even amid all these horrible Supreme Court decisions and to curtail voting rights, it is still possible to vote horrible people out, which does make a difference. Are there events or actions or people that you've seen in recent years that keep you optimistic about what is possible and what we can do?
Well, sure. There are lots of them that one doesn't even know that have great successes all the time in small ways, and maybe small ways that will become in the butterfly effect that is real big ways. But I think specifically because he came and spoke to Steven at the one theatrical screening we had for this movie the day before it premiered at a theater in New York called Metrograph. Maxwell Frost, who's a congressman from Florida and the youngest congressman in the House of Representatives, Gen Z, 26 years old or whatever it is, came and watched the show, and then basically, without saying, oh, and then in this episode that, or this episode that, but his appreciation of the show and how it did essentially send those messages, just as you're saying, about how change is a long process, and it's not going to be overnight. And there's all kinds of reasons to feel, oh my God, every day that all of us can't not have about either the democracy or the climate, and more to boot. But those are as the two big ones. And he's simultaneously serious and cheerful, which is kind of what this show is too. And because if you're just going to be doom scrolling and like give up and there's nothing you can do, nothing matters, well, okay, sorry, I'm not prepared to do that until it becomes more hopeless than I almost can imagine it being. I mean, we think of all of the people. We don't have to say Nazi Germany, but think of Nazi Germany. I mean, it has been much worse in many places in, if not my life, well, my lifetime, but my parents' lifetime, my anti-fascist parents' lifetimes, than it is here now. So like, man, keep going. And like, it may not be fighting a war, or it may be, but it's fighting, it's struggling and doing whatever you can in your little life here and now to, push the ball forward and keep catastrophe at bay.
You mentioned earlier about the billionaire who's building this bunker for himself. And it turns out this is not sci-fi. This is actually happening. There's this 2022 article from The Guardian's Douglas Rushkoff about this exact same thing. These same types of luxurious underground bunkers basically serve as a safe place for billionaires of the future. As someone who's written and parodied the weirdest, wealthiest people for decades, what should people know about how the super rich basically insulate themselves from the world's biggest problems?
Well, that Doug Rushkoff piece is amazing, and where people should just go to that. You should put a link on your site. It's fantastic, and it is so strange. I mean, it is, and in this day and age, in so many ways, and certainly for the last, when did Trump start running for president? 7 or 8 years ago. So much of reality is just, well, you can't make this up. This, reality is outrunning satire every day. But it is, I mean, this idea that protecting yourself at the billionaire level, having bunkers and, private security forces and all of that stuff, like maybe you'll get through the Armageddon, but like, do you really want to? I mean, what are you the winner really at that point? But then the kind of frenzy and fear that I think is propagated for political reasons on the part of just everyday people to buy more guns and all of that stuff that, isn't going to save you. I mean, not in any meaningful sense, or your children or your grandchildren. It just isn't. And it's so yeah. But the rich, as Fitzgerald said, are different than you and me. And the gigantitude of their dreams when they're not, arranging to do half-naked cage matches in Rome. They're building their underground bunkers. I mean, which of those is fiction? I don't know.
I know, just like we're recording this the day after it seems like Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg are not going to fight, which is just a wild sentence to say out loud. I know you in Spy Magazine, you get so much credit, rightfully so, for taking the piss out of Donald Trump, but you've covered so many weird rich people across so many industries over the years. And I think it's really fitting that in commandz, at the center of the show, like you mentioned, Michael Cera is playing this tech billionaire who is like transformed into this AI and is clearly responsible for some, if not many, of societal ills. And as you mentioned, it's kind of, is he attempting to fix it? You're not really sure of his motivations when you meet the character. But I think over the last 10 years, one of the biggest public reckonings has been with tech executives and the power that they amassed. And I really like Ben Smith's new book, Traffic, because he says something out loud that I don't know that a lot of us have admitted, which is like, we thought tech executives were going to be private sector progressives, and they helped get Obama elected. And it seemed like there may be a kind of progressivism that built out of tech, and it didn't happen. And quite the opposite happened. I'm curious what you make or what you find interesting about the way we're kind of re-examining today's tech billionaires now.
Well, I mean, your point about like, oh yeah, along with, all of the net utopia stuff that I was there in the 90s when that was all at its peak. And yes, the natural outcome of that would be that all these people, yes, they'll be progressives. Well, not so much, I mean, but what they are is the ultimate, I mean, what they tend to be is the ultimate version of what people always were saying in the 90s and the aughts, which is, oh, I'm a social liberal, but I'm a fiscal conservative, meaning I want low taxes, go fuck who you want and smoke weed, but I want low taxes. And that's really the Elon Musk, and probably Mark Zuckerberg, and in general, that is the Silicon Valley rich guy politics, right? But at the same time, we have a kind of, more coherent, and not even more coherent, an economic progressive movement that has more traction than it has had in, my lifetime in this country, really, in the last, I would say, decade or so. And that's why, as I was writing Evil Geniuses and as it was coming out, I felt like, wow, this is not just some cry in the wilderness that, Jesse Jackson might have made in 1988 about things that can't ever happen and won't ever happen, which is to say that I think people understand, and even people on the right in their misguided ways understand, that big tech and all that can mean, but the concentration of power, the unregulated concentration of power, economic power, cultural power, all of the power that those companies have, that Google and Facebook and whatever, Twitter, I guess, have, but the concentration of wealth in that specific way has so many negative effects that I think people understand. And again, it is, there's all kinds of ways that the left and right people inclined to be left or right are not coalescing around this. But it's interesting to see how there is at a time when nothing feels like there's a consensus and everything is polarized. Well, I'm not sure on the issue of the power of big tech, at least. We'll see. And it's, it's tricky to pull off. But you see, Josh Hawley and Elizabeth Warren sponsoring bills together one doesn't want to be a Pollyanna about the possibilities, but I think, it's one of the things, those kinds of things, in all of their slow moving, strange bedfellow ways, occasionally give me glimmers of hope to counteract the giant fires of despair.
Well, one of the things that has given us hope over the last year is the fact, when you and Ty talked about Evil Geniuses 3 years ago, Joe Biden was running on a different theory of government, right? He was running on, as president, a much greater investment with what government would be able to do. And in the show commandz, at one point you have a character that is just hit with an inheritance tax. And again, I don't want to spoil the show, but this allows government spending to do more. And one of the most notable things we've seen in 2023, we are 1 year since the Inflation Reduction Act has passed, which was a massive government spending effort. And we are living through an economic miracle. Unemployment is low, inflation is cooling a bit, and we seem to be avoiding the recession that most economists, I will say, thought we were going to live through this year. At the same time, we're accelerating decarbonization. It's a huge economic success story. And Evil Geniuses is all about how we started to break down the power of government and the power of labor. And we're seeing a rebound. Do you think that we could look back at 2023 as one of those inflection points, like you are in the show commandz? Do you think that this could be a big moment of change?
Well, we'll see. I am reluctant to predict anything, but it could definitely be. And of course, and as we were talking about it, and when we were talking about Evil Geniuses, it came out in 2020, the year of COVID. And my last chapter was about how the crisis of COVID was suddenly requiring the government, even the Republicans in government, to say, no, we got to spend these trillions of dollars because this is an emergency. We got to keep the economy going, blah, 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 blah. But the fact, the whole thing of don't let a crisis go to waste, also, in addition to the things you mentioned, this earned income tax program that reduced poverty, childhood poverty, by this enormous percentage. Of course, it was only temporary, so that will now go back to regress to the mean. But yeah, it's an amazing thing. If you what you hadn't had for so many years, and again, as I talk about in Evil Geniuses, is a demonstrable success of using big government in effective ways. And my goodness, I mean, this is, as you say, it's only been 2.5 years of this administration doing changing these policies to do this fiscally and socially interventionist progressive stuff. And it's, show me where it hasn't been good, right? I mean, show me, I mean, yeah, I mean, and it's remarkable. So yeah, I think you have, and again, if we are, as we must, depending on the younger generation, to be convinced, having not seen any convincing evidence during the aughts or tens, say, that government is worth a damn, because what's it ever going to do? And they don't care about me. They can't do anything. Nothing gets done. Well, look at this. I mean, if people at least can be, feel like, no, the 20s were not bad, given that we had the horrors of the pandemic and everything else. I think political attitudes and the willingness to think like, no, progress can happen over time, and especially happen, as the literature shows, when somebody is 12 and 16 and 22, and like, I don't know, I can certainly, as you're suggesting, spin a hopeful scenario out of what people are seeing right now, if they're just becoming kind of sentient about the world and politics and all the rest.
Okay, well, let's talk about the flip side to that, which is the regressive decisions that are coming out of this Supreme Court that we have right now. I love that the Federalist Society made an appearance in commandz, a very prominent appearance, because that organization played such a big role in Evil Geniuses, the story about basically how that faction came to power. What have you made of the Federalist Society's handpicked Supreme Court decisions really over the last couple of years?
Well, it's, I knew when I started researching Evil Geniuses, I knew about the Federalist Society, but I didn't realize, I mean, in some ways, even more than the now famous Powell memo from 1971 that like laid it all out, the creation of the Federalist Society in the 1980s is the most kind of remarkable, like, this is what, I mean, like, basically guys in rooms saying, this is what we got to do, let's do it, boom, they did it, and here's the Supreme Court 40 years later. It's remarkable. It wasn't like one of these like, oh, we'll stumble this way and stumble that way, and oh, we won some, we lost some, oh, Ronald Reagan came along, that's good. This was really a very systematic plan that was like 5 stars out of 5 in terms of the success of their plan. So it is remarkable to see that. It's just astonishing. And so, no, and I was happy we were able to actually have a Supreme Court justice character say and be in front of a Federalist Society, branding. And as you can imagine, that was a conversation with our lawyers about whether we were going to actually go there. And he, being a lawyer, actually said, no, anyway, we got through it. So he was exactly the kind of lawyer you want in a situation like this. I was pleased by that. And it's amazing. It is, I mean, I would say, I mean, for those like me, because my previous book, Fantasyland, was really took the position that so many most conspiracy theories are not true. So in Evil Geniuses, I was saying, well, but if you have a subtle enough idea of conspiracies, they're not entirely false. They're just not as crude as they're usually depicted. And I would say, I mean, if you want to, like, I mean, the chapter on the Federalist Society is the one that is the most, to me, perhaps because of these stories. It's the part of it that's the most, man, this really is guys in a room deciding how to maintain their wealth and power and change America, and then do it. And these quotes that I have in the book of these guys, 5 years into it, less than a decade into it, saying, no, we hope in 20 years to have a whole bunch of appellate judges that are Federalist graduates, and then, you know, maybe in another decade, some people on the Supreme Court. What? You know, and it's just, it was a little group at a few colleges. I mean, what the ambition, again, as I say in the book, and I think is true, you just, okay, look at them, you know, hate the player, but play the game. You know, I mean, you know, it worked for them, and the complacency of the liberal establishment to allow that to happen, because nobody ever thinks when something is the way it is, and is that way even for a few years, everybody comes to think very quickly, oh, this is just the way it is. You can't change. Nothing's going to change. You know, I mean, and now I'm old enough that I see, like, well, that's what everyone thought, say, about the Soviet Union. That's what everyone thought about, oh, you know, liberal democracy. That's what everybody thinks about everything. But in fact, you know, that's true until it suddenly isn't. And the earthquake, figurative earthquake, changes everything.
Yeah, one thing that we actually talked to Senator Sheldon Whitehouse about, which is the expulsion of dark money. You know, that's one, you know, in addition to the Federalist Society, it's all that dark money that has helped propel so many of these political candidates, but also Supreme Court justices to the power that they have now. There's recently been some, you know, some media attention around this subject with some of the Clarence Thomas financial backers coming to light. Do you think we're going to see any real traction, though, to expose and truly expel dark money? Or do you think that its grip on American politicians is just too strong for them to do anything about it?
Well, it's one of those things, like, that could be this way forever and we're never going to change it. Or it could be one of these things that suddenly in 2028, we'll look back and go, remember when we were talking in 2023, it seemed like this would never stop? Well, look, it has. I mean, I really have, in the last, one of the ways in which I just changed my whole view of history in the last 20 years, and really it's mostly a function of living long enough, is seeing, like, these things that seem unchangeable, like, for better and for worse, change. So, I mean, Sheldon Whitehouse, by the way, hero of mine. I once had dinner with him. He's the greatest, and I feel all of his stuff about everything he says, really, I feel like we need to get together and have a drink or more together. But you know, I mean, the thing about dark money is, I mean, dark money is a good rhetorical device, and some of it is dark, and you don't know who it's coming from and who's paying for the Federalist magazine, and you know, and there's lack of transparency that is a big problem. But what I think is, even before it was dark, the funding of the overfunding of politics by the rich and powerful was out of control. It didn't need to be dark. You know, it's a bad thing when our democracy is for sale, right? And again, that's a history that I just sketch out in Evil Geniuses. And the darkness, it makes it worse. But let's not confuse, you know, the problem is not just the fact that we don't know who's funding what exactly or why. And it's good that we know that this billionaire is giving this to Sam Alito and this billionaire is giving this to Clarence Thomas. But the problem is the you know, unlike almost any country on earth, maybe any country on earth, the degree to which gigantic amounts of money, very, very, very rich people can, you know, have their way in elections. Now, of course, it's not that every election in every liberal democracy is clean and good and without the influence of rich people, obviously not. But the degree to which, in less going on 50 years, the United States has allowed that. And then, of course, with Citizens United, open up the floodgates a whole other level to allow to basically make campaign finance reform that needs to be done, that will make it the way it used to be, unconstitutional. You know, we're in a really bad place. And so, and fixing this, I mean, it's the problem of amending the Constitution, right? Or the decades it would take to get 5 progressives on the Supreme Court, this is going to be a long game. Now, if you start making enough people who might call themselves Republicans today, or maybe won't tomorrow, who knows, enough people who just have had enough with the obvious corruption. I mean, it's a simple word, and it always has been. It's corruption. And if right now at this hysterical tribal craze moment, people think, well, I don't care if my side's corrupt, it's my side, I want my team to win. I don't care if they're indicted, I don't care if they're corrupt. But I don't know that I don't think that lasts forever. And I can think that the sheer, at some point, as it has happened in the past, when politics was very corrupt in the 1880s and 1890s and 1900s, and then we got the progressive era, and it became less so, right? So it takes a while, and it's nothing happens by itself. And again, one of the points of Evil Geniuses is that you got to do what you can do, and you got to push the pendulum. It doesn't swing on its own necessarily. We'll see.
Well, the series commandz, it does not shy away from some of the bigger picture morality questions. We've seen people like Al Gore, Cristiano Figueres change their tune recently on the idea of allowing fossil fuel companies to participate and now to profit from this green energy transition, basically rewarding them for fixing the problem that they've created. What do you think? I mean, do you think fossil fuel companies should have a seat at the table now, given their history of maximizing profits at society's expense?
Well, it's, and there are seats at the table, and there are seats at the table. I mean, you don't want them writing the laws as they have effectively for so many years. And in all of these worlds, big pharma, I mean, all of these industries in which the corporate leaders have not been good stewards of the common good, shall we say? I get why people will say, no, screw them. No, they should have nothing to do with it. If, however, they are, I mean, I would be careful. And I think at least, I mean, if you got, as some of them, I mean, and again, you can, to me, the other thing I've learned in my elder years is grade, I do grade everything and everyone on a curve. I mean, fossil fuel company A, if they seem like maybe they're reasonable and really they do want to be an energy company, and they see that fossil fuels that's ending, and by the way, in places like Texas, where suddenly most of the energy is renewable, produced renewably, that the future is is in that direction. And just as, again, trust but verify, as Ronald Reagan famously said about the Soviets, I mean they are still giant energy companies, right? And so to suddenly say, nope, you're done, you have nothing to do with this, it's probably just a strategic error. I mean, if they continue to be bad actors, as so many of them have been in so many ways for so many years, then don't welcome them as to their table as much as you might others, But I don't know. The thing, I mean, I've been made hopeful for the last decade by the extraordinary, how cheap solar and wind as electricity producers have become in the last decade. I mean, it was, if you'd said, and I'm sure you've talked about this in the show a million times, but if you'd said 10 years ago or 20 years ago, this is how economically competitive these renewable energy sources will be in 2023. People, no, you're dreaming, fellas. And here we are. So, I mean, I believe in the efficacy of a correctly managed capitalism sufficiently to think that the invisible hand, aided in the case of renewables, certainly by government help in this country and all over the world, we'll get there, and we'll suddenly convince convince shareholders, investors, the financial world, like, no, there's a reason we're going in this direction. It's, even if you don't care about saving the planet and slowing down global warming, it's a way to make my next $1 billion, you know, and I'm okay with that. It's another thing we deal with, and we dealt with more in an earlier cut of I almost call it Evil Geniuses of commandz, is how much to talk about. Do we care about the intentions of actors, right? And you were getting this before. I mean, in a certain way, yes, you do, but like, if you can convince people to do the right thing, or regulate them into doing the right thing, or shame them into, or whatever, however you get there. Yes, I'd rather have everyone be good and care about the common good, but you know, human beings are human beings, and greed is greed. And so I'm you know, don't rely on them on billionaires or fossil fuel companies to do the right thing, but if they can be coerced or persuaded to do the right thing, then they don't have to go to prison, I guess.
You know, you write just about, like we were talking about earlier, you write about just about everything. Fiction, nonfiction, novels, screenplays, podcasts. I promise we'll stop kissing ass after this, but like Ty and I loved Nixon at War.
Oh,
absolutely
thank
love
you.
that, which came out a few years ago. People haven't checked it out. Just a phenomenal series. How do you determine what you mentioned? You're writing a book now. Like, how do you determine what you want to write about and what interests you in exploring?
Well, that I'm really glad you like that. I'm very proud of that, and it's a thing. You know, I was sort of, you know, I just finished Evil Geniuses, and it was COVID, and I just finished up doing my radio show, and this guy came to me, Steve Atlas, with this plan, with this tremendous research operation of tapes from the Nixon era, and said, "Do you want to do this?" And I thought, yeah, this looks like a good gig, and I really thought I was just going to be kind of the narrator, you know, the Peter Coyote for his Ken Burns, and then I got so into it. I really got much more deeply into it than I expected to, and very proud of it, and learned a lot, and I'm really proud of it. Anyway, so that was, I just stumbled into, right? I didn't say, oh, I want to do something about Nixon and Vietnam and how that, you know, was the source of all of our polarization and Trump today, you know. But as it was like anything else, right? I mean, you start reading, you start thinking, or for me anyway, and then I get more and more interested. And at a certain point, I get interested enough that I think like, oh, maybe I've figured out a way to write a book about this, or do a podcast about this, or whatever. So it's just getting interested enough to think like, you know, do I want to spend 6 months or 2 years or whatever doing this thing? Because that, you know, that's a commitment, you know, and so, you know, and that's really it. And what is there as an opportunity? This guy Steve Atlas came and said, "Hey, I want to do this thing about Nixon," and Steven Soderbergh came to him and said, "Hey, what?" You know, so I mean, it was hard. It was hard not to say yes, Mr. Soderbergh. I'm happy to have you do this with you. But otherwise, it's just, you know, I mean, you keep reading, you keep thinking, you keep talking to my wife and friends, and become interested in new things and other things. And you know, and this next book is kind of my even though it's a novel, my agent says, well, it is another novel, but it can be kind of for readers of Fantasyland and Evil Geniuses, and she's of course thinking marketing. It's kind of like a third in a series to them. I said, oh yeah, makes sense. Good. Okay. So, you know, I have no plan. I have never had a plan. I've never had a strategy. I've had a strategy. My strategy is to, you know, not be bored and, you know, try to have fun. And when you fail, move on quickly and forget about it.
Steven Soderbergh had a really interesting comment on a podcast interview talking recently about commandz, where he mentioned that since his movie Che came out about, I think that was about 13 years ago, 12 years ago, that he's basically been entirely focused on being a political filmmaker. And it's one of the reasons why he was interested in working with you on this project, obviously. What interests you about this point in Steven's career and his work?
Well, one thing that interests me is I met him in my hometown of Omaha, Nebraska in 2011, when I was interviewing him for this big fundraiser for this nonprofit that I'm involved with out there. That was the event on stage in front of 1,000 people, and then played on my radio show, at which he said, "I'm retiring." And the Steven Soderbergh retirement, I provoked it. I was there for that. And then, of course, he proceeds to make 10 feature films and TV shows, and I mean, it's a joke the degree to which he did the opposite from retire. So, but we are very different people, have very different paths, do very different things, all that. But I would say around that same time, I think Che was a little earlier than that, right? 2007, 6, whatever. But it was around that same time, actually. And I talk about this in Evil Geniuses, but that, in the aughts, that I suddenly realized that I had a political transformation. I didn't go from far right to far left or anything, but I went from, liberal to, at least in economics, much more to the left. And I mean, maybe it's whatever. It's the times, it's, it was also the time that things like Occupy Wall Street were happening. And it was the time that, the what we now call the neoliberal consensus was not had enough time to prove its failure, right? He was turning 40 and I was turning 50, and there's a middle age thing happening maybe. And so I think, we came at it, from different places, but in kind of parallel paths, probably.
Yeah, Ty and I were talking about this, like even beyond commandz, like movies like Aaron Brockovich and Contagion and No Sudden Move. These are not explicitly about climate change, but they are very much telling the stories of how we got here with climate change, in addition to the other issues that they're covering. And it's not just you and Steven Soderbergh. As far as climate goes, we get really excited because there are like many really talented, famous people, and even like emerging artists that are telling the stories either indirectly or directly on climate. And art and film and television have always been taking on the biggest societal issues. But I'm curious if there's anything that you're seeing on watching now that you find really exciting that's in the kind of political art landscape.
Well, that's a good question. And I mean, the show commandz. No,
Exactly.
I mean, in a different way. Not that it like is a call to action in any direct way, but the very, very excellent television series Severance, in terms of its depiction of big tech and corporate murkiness, and I thought, I mean, again, as you're saying about Steven's movies that aren't especially political but are, I think that's something that was. It's interesting. I think about climate change and climate action as it's a really hard thing to do. It's a particularly hard issue to take on, I think, in fiction. And I've read quite a bit of people, and a lot of it, and understandably, it's just strictly, here we are in 2070, here's the grimmest dystopian depiction you can possibly, okay, yep, that could be, I get it. Which, I mean, and it could be good art, but I don't, and then there's the whole question of good art versus bad art, art that nudges people in certain directions versus what doesn't, and that's, a conversation and an argument that will go on forever. I don't know. What do you guys see? I'm not able to think of off the top of my head a great political show or film right now. I mean, there are ones that I think I've seen that don't work, and I often think, I mean, that's the thing about commandz. I've always been a little skeptical of trying to make art. Not that I ever call anything I've ever done art, but trying to make art that like is meant to, is motivated by politics.
Yeah, this is an incredibly obvious answer, but the whole run of Succession was there's a parallel to commandz, and that like the lesson one of the lessons I took from commandz that I also took from Succession is that there are just too few people with too much fucking power. And
Right.
these are oftentimes like the Michael Cera character. Again, I don't want to spoil anything, but he's just, when you look back at when he starts to look back at parts of his life, he's just like kind of a broken person. And like that's what I think about the Succession kids, and that's what I'm thinking about when Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg are thinking about going into a UFC cage fight, right? And it's just like these people just have too much power, and if you're gonna give, and like the most broken people are gonna seek the most power, and often in many cases, and like we shouldn't have to just sit here and live the consequences of their decisions.
Well said, and thank you for reminding me of Succession. I spent a week when it ended writing this essay about it for the New York Times, and why that didn't come to mind. But absolutely, Succession is a brilliant show. Was a brilliant show. Is a great show about the political economy, no question. And interestingly, Succession, the Michael Cera character, commandz, and these guys doing a cage fight or pretending to do it or whatever. It reminds me of, in addition to having too much money and wealth, it's this kind of arrested development. These permanent adolescents, you know, they're all like 16-year-old boys, basically. I mean, and I mean, and the broken children in Succession, you know, they're just they're broken children, as the Michael Cera character was, at least for much of the show.
You have some incredibly talented people in the show, writing on the show, just some absolutely hilarious comedians working on the show, in the show as well. Like, what did you like? Like, what was the best part of this entire experience?
You know, it had so many best parts. You know, I mean, seeing this master filmmaker with these, who's also mentioned, I could just, you know, I mean, he's my hero, Steven is, but at work, you know, in every sense of that word. I mean, certainly on the set, just was extraordinary to see how efficient he is, how much he loves doing it, how like literally hands-on he is. All that was just a jaw-dropping, extraordinary gift of an experience. But yeah, working with all these people I'd never met, like the comedian Chloe Radcliffe and the cartoonist Emily Flake and Akila Hughes, and all these people who, you know, I mean, it happens all the time in film and television, but I'm not sure like this exactly, where, you know, it's not like we had a writer's room that had been together making a show for years. We just got together and everybody pitched ideas, and so that was a dream. But but I would say, I mean, basically having this thing that was, you know, a show and with unions and craft services, and it was really shooting a movie for 3 weeks with Steven Soderbergh, was just like, I mean, it was really a constant pinch myself. This is so amazing, great. Now, that, which is not to say that it wasn't really, really hard up to that moment, and there were like scary moments, and what, rewrite this whole thing, rethink this whole thing, we're going to shoot in 5 days. I mean, I don't want to say it was just an easy peasy dream all the way, but it was amazing, and it made me, and you know, Liev Schreiber, I mean, I don't know, I still again, we don't want to give away too much, but Liev Schreiber and his dog in one of the episodes makes me laugh every time I watch it. And I've watched it 100 times, you know. So that was just, and every time I've worked with actors before, not a lot, but I've worked with actors here and there and written plays and stuff. Every time you see an actor take your words and make more of it, it is, you know, short of having a child, the closest thing to magic I've ever experienced. It's just, wow, yeah, I think this is pretty good, these lines I've written, but like to see actors do it. So it was all amazing. The whole experience actually has made me come up with a new concept, that if I were the type of person to write little short self-help books that sell at, you know, bookstore checkouts, I would write it, which is, I've never believed in bucket lists. I don't like the idea of bucket lists, like, oh, I do it all and then I can die. Ooh. And like, also like, I don't know. I just don't like the idea of this and this and this. I want to do this and this. I've never liked that. However, this experience and its marvelousness and its out of the blueness and what it, it was a dream come true, but it was a dream I never had, right? So it's the retroactive bucket list. That's my new concept. It's, you don't know what's on your bucket list until the thing happens, and then you put it in. Oh, I met this person, I fell in love. Now that meeting that person is on my bucket list. Oh, Steven Soderbergh asked me to do something with me about my book, and we do this. And it was a dream. That's now on my bucket list. So your bucket list doesn't exist until the moment you die, is my new theory of the case.
Yeah, we have and I know you have collaborators like editors and people that will help you when you're writing a book, but I have to imagine it's so much of a much more solitary process. Now you have all these amazing collaborators and they're finding things that they're inspired from the book and your words that you're writing for the script. And it's this really interesting process. I would imagine. I want to wrap up with here. There have been a lot of interesting films and television series, like we were mentioning, that have touched on the climate crisis or touched on these issues. And we've covered some of them on the show, like Don't Look Up and Extrapolations, which was on Apple TV that was released earlier this year. And like your show, they not only say something about the world, but they literally connect some of the dots with action websites and materials to get people to act. And it was cool to see that on the commandz site, there are recommendations for organizations to support, like run for something if you want to get involved in running for local office. And also, we were so excited to see that there's a link to 350.org, which is a great organization in the climate space. To wrap up here, how would you like to see people act after they watch commandz? Like, once they've watched the show, what do you hope that they'll do?
That they realize that doing nothing is understandable, but really not an option. You have no right to complain if you do nothing. I mean, and feel as though, okay, these people are not just scolding me and hectoring me. These people, meaning you guys, people, liberals, progressives, people involved in politics, which I think many, many, many people, fairly or not, feel like, stop scolding me, stop scolding me. One of the ways we thought about, like, the audience members we wanted among all of the audience members are like guys who maybe aren't necessarily Fox News viewers, but they are Joe Rogan listeners, who don't want to feel like, oh, they're just school marming me again or something. So I hope some of those people feel as though being nudged to do the right thing and take right action is the only way. And yeah, you can do nothing but sit and play games and drink beer if you want, but stop complaining about how hot it is or how unfair it is or how shitty your job is or how you have no health care. Stop complaining. If you're not going to do whatever little thing, and I'm not saying go out and be a hero, but get out there and do things. So that, and if people can, again, as I said, I've always been skeptical of political art, but if people can look at this and think, I could make something that might push the ball forward in a political way, a work of whatever, entertainment or art or something, that would be good. And if, again, but this other thing, I'm just feeling like none of us, or very few of us, are just earnest and virtuous or just funny and having fun. And those two things need to, it seems to me, be together, bread and circuses. And I mentioned Maxwell Frost, Congressman Maxwell Frost, who was great on this very subject, saying that in his campaign, when he got elected to the House at 24 actually, when he was elected, I think, he thought it was so important to have bands and entertainment and films and have entertainment be part of his dancing, be part of his campaign events, because it's not like, it's life, and to make to get people want to be involved in that, it's not like, not everybody is going to go be him and run for Congress, but whether it's that or whatever you can do, I mean, to pitch in and not lose hope. I mean, that's, I guess, what it is. You know, don't lose hope. Things. I mean, again, the future that we depict in commandz 2053 is horrific, funny. I hope in its horrific dystopian quality, but like, you know, you can keep those two thoughts in your head at the same time and try to make it better rather than let it get worse.
That's a great place to end on. Again, people can go check out the new series commandz, which is available to purchase now at commandzseries.com. Kurt Andersen, thank you again for coming back on the show. And we're excited for the next book. I'm so glad you got an awesome project on the way. So thank you again for joining us on the show.
Happy to be here. Also, we should mention probably that all of the proceeds, everybody's $7.99s, goes to two great philanthropic goods. One is the Anti-Racism Institute at Boston University, and the other is Children's Aid, which is an old, wonderful Children's Aid Society in New York City.
So buy it not only for yourself, but for several friends as well. So more people can see it and the money goes to a great cause. It's awesome.
And you can watch it forever. It's not one of these things where you only have 30 days. You can watch it forever again and again.